I married a widower with a young son. One day, the boy told me his real mom still lives in our house. My real mom still lives here, my stepson whispered one night. I laughed it off until I started noticing strange things around our home. When I married Jake, I thought I understood what it meant to step into the life of a widower. He had been so devoted to his late wife, Olivia, and he was raising their 7-year-old son, Noah, all on his own. I respected the deep love he still held for her, knowing it was tied to the memory of his first love and Noah's mother. I wasn't here to replace her, just to create a new chapter for all of us. The first few months as a family were everything I had hoped for. Noah welcomed me warmly, with none of the hesitation I had feared. I spent hours playing games with him, reading his favorite bedtime stories, and helping him with schoolwork. I even learned to make his favorite mac and cheese, exactly how he liked it, extra cheesy with breadcrumbs on top. One day, out of nowhere, Noah started calling me mom, and every time, Jake and I would catch each other's eye with proud smiles. It felt like things were falling perfectly into place. One night, after a cozy evening, I was tucking Noah into bed. Suddenly, he looked up at me, his eyes wide and serious. "You know, my real mom still lives here," he whispered. I chuckled softly, running my fingers through his hair. "Oh, sweetheart, your mom will always be with you, in your heart." But Noah shook his head, clutching my hand with an intensity that made my heart skip. "No, she's here, in the house. I see her sometimes." A chill prickled at the back of my neck. I forced a smile, brushing it off as a child's imagination running wild. "It's just a dream, honey. Go to sleep." Noah settled down, but I felt uneasy. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself he was just adjusting to a new family, a new normal. But as the days passed, small things around the house began to unsettle me. For starters, I'd clean up Noah's toys, only to find them later exactly where I'd picked them up. Not just once or twice, but again and again. And the kitchen cabinets, I'd rearranged them the way I liked. But the next morning, things were back in their old places, like someone was trying to undo my touch on the home. It was unnerving, but I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Then, one evening, I noticed something I couldn't explain. I had moved Olivia's photograph from the living room to a more discreet shelf in the hallway. But when I came downstairs the next day, there it was, back in its original spot, perfectly dusted as though someone had just cleaned it. I took a deep breath and decided to discuss it with Jake. "Are you moving things around the house?" I asked one evening, trying to sound casual as we were finishing dinner. Jake looked up, grinning as though I'd told a silly joke. "No, Anna. Why would I? I think you're just imagining things." He laughed, but there was something in his eyes, a hint of discomfort or maybe reluctance. I couldn't place it, but I felt an invisible wall between us. A few nights later, Noah and I were working on a puzzle on the living room floor. He was focused, placing the pieces with his little tongue poking out in concentration, when he suddenly looked up at me, eyes wide and sincere. "Mom says you shouldn't touch her things." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, sweetie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I glanced toward the hallway. Noah leaned in, lowering his voice. "Real mom, she doesn't like it when you move her things," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to be watching us. I sat frozen, trying to process what he was saying. The way he looked at me was so serious, like he was sharing a secret he wasn't supposed to. I forced a smile, nodded, and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "It's okay, Noah. You don't have to worry. Let's finish up our puzzle, all right?" But that night, as Jake and I lay in bed, my mind raced. I tried to tell myself it was just a kid's overactive imagination, but each time I closed my eyes, I'd hear Noah's words, see the way he'd glance nervously toward the hallway. When Jake was finally asleep, I got up quietly, heading to the attic. I knew Jake kept some of Olivia's old things in a box up there. Maybe if I could see them and find out more about her, it would help me understand why Noah was acting this way. I climbed the creaky stairs, my flashlight slicing through the dark, until I found the box tucked in a corner, dusty but well kept. The lid was heavier than I expected, as though it had absorbed years of memories. I pulled it off and found old photos, letters she'd written to Jake, and her wedding ring wrapped carefully in tissue. It was all so personal, and I felt a strange pang of guilt going through it. But there was something else. A few items looked freshly moved, almost as if they'd been handled recently. And that's when I noticed it. A small door in the corner, half hidden behind a stack of boxes. I froze, squinting at the door. I'd been in the attic a few times but had never noticed it. Slowly, I pushed the boxes aside and twisted the old, tarnished knob. It clicked, opening into a narrow room dimly lit by a small window. And there, sitting on a twin bed covered in blankets, was a woman I recognized immediately from the photos. She looked up, her eyes wide. I stepped back, startled, and stammered, "You're Rachel, Jake's sister, aren't you?" Rachel's expression shifted from surprise to something else, a quiet, eerie calm. "I'm sorry. You weren't supposed to find out this way." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "Why didn't Jake tell me? Why are you up here?" She looked down, smoothing the edge of her blanket. "Jake didn't want you to know. He thought you'd leave if you found out. If you saw me like this, I've been here for 3 years now." 3 years? I could barely process it. "You've been hiding up here all this time?" Rachel nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "I don't go outside much. I prefer it up here. But sometimes I get restless. And Noah, I talk to him sometimes. He's such a sweet boy." A chill ran through me. "Rachel, what are you telling him?" "He thinks his mother's still here. He told me that she doesn't like it when I move things." Rachel's face softened, but there was a trace of something unsettling in her eyes. "I tell him stories sometimes. About his mother. He misses her. I think it comforts him to know she's still present. But he thinks you're her." "Noah thinks you're his real mom," I said, my voice breaking. She looked away. "Maybe it's better that way. Maybe it helps him to feel she's still here." I felt my head spinning as I backed out of the room, closing the door behind me. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. I went straight downstairs, finding Ethan in the living room, his face immediately full of concern when he saw me. "Ethan," I whispered, barely holding it together. "Why didn't you tell me about Emma?" He went pale, his eyes darting away. "Claire, do you realize what she's been doing? Noah thinks she's his real mom." Ethan's face fell, and he sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I didn't know it had gotten that bad. I thought keeping her here, out of sight, would be best. I couldn't leave her alone. She's my sister." And after Sophia passed, Emma wasn't the same. She refused to get any help. I sat beside him, gripping his hand. "But she's confusing Noah, Ethan. He's just a child. He doesn't understand." Ethan sighed, nodding slowly. "You're right. This isn't fair to Noah or to you. We can't keep pretending like everything's fine." After a few moments, I whispered, "I think we should set up a camera, just to see if she's really been leaving her room, to know for sure." Ethan hesitated, but eventually he agreed. We set up a small, hidden camera outside Emma's door that night. The next evening, after Noah had gone to bed, we sat in our room watching the footage. For hours, nothing happened. Then, just past midnight, we saw her door creak open. Emma stepped into the hallway, her hair loose around her face, and stood there, looking at Noah's bedroom door. Then Noah appeared, rubbing his eyes, and walked toward her. Even on the grainy screen, I could see his little hand reaching for her. She knelt down, whispering something to him, her hand on his shoulder. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Noah nod and say something back, looking up at her with that same earnest expression. I felt a wave of anger and sadness I couldn't quite control. "She's been feeding his imagination, Ethan. This isn't healthy." Ethan watched the screen, his face drawn and tired. "I know. This has gone too far. We can't let her do this to him anymore." The next morning, Ethan sat down with Noah, explaining everything in simple terms. He told him that his Aunt Emma was sick, that sometimes her illness made her act in ways that confused people, and that his real mom wasn't coming back. Noah was quiet, looking down at his little hands, and I could tell he was struggling to understand. "But she told me she's my mom. You can't send her away, Dad," he murmured, his eyes filling with tears. Ethan hugged him tightly, his voice thick with emotion. "I know, buddy, but that was her way of trying to help you feel close to your mom. She loves you, just like we do, and we're going to help her get better." Later that day, Ethan arranged for Emma to see a doctor. The process was painful. She protested, even cried, but Ethan stayed firm, explaining that she needed help. Once she was admitted to the hospital, The house felt quieter, almost lighter. Noah struggled at first. He'd ask about Emma, sometimes wondering if she was coming back. But gradually, he began to understand that what he'd believed wasn't real, and he started to make peace with the truth. Through it all, Ethan and I grew closer, supporting each other as we helped Noah cope. It wasn't the journey I expected when I married him, but somehow, we'd come out stronger on the other side, bound together not just by love, but by everything we'd faced as a family.